Hello and welcome to the Anxiety Reset podcast. Practical help for anxiety, panic attacks, overthinking, and some tips for better sleep. I'm Neil Robson from Faversham Hypnotherapy. In each episode, we'll explore why anxiety happens, what keeps it going, and what you can do to begin feeling calmer and more in control. Now, this podcast is for educational purposes. It's not a substitute for medical advice. If you're concerned about your health, please speak to an appropriate healthcare professional. And you can find the Anxiety Reset podcast on YouTube, TikTok, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all major podcast platforms. So let's get started. One of the most common questions I hear from people struggling with anxiety is this: why does it always seem worse at night? Perhaps you've experienced it yourself. You get through the day reasonably well. You're busy, working, talking to people, getting things done. You're keeping yourself occupied. And then the evening arrives. The house becomes quieter. The distractions begin to disappear. And then suddenly your mind seems to wake up. Thoughts that barely bothered you during the day suddenly feel important. Questions that seemed manageable at lunchtime now feel overwhelming. And problems that felt small suddenly feel much bigger. And before you know it, you're lying in bed thinking about things you'd rather not be thinking about. What if I don't sleep? What if tomorrow is difficult? What if something's wrong? What if I never get better? What if this anxiety never goes away? And for many people, nighttime becomes a time when anxiety can feel at its strongest. And if that's happening to you, there's a good reason for it. One of the biggest reasons anxiety feels worse at night is because there are fewer distractions. During the day, your attention is pulled in lots of different directions. Work needs doing, people need speaking to, there's tasks that need completing probably, decisions that need making. And even if anxiety is present, it's competing with lots of other things for your attention. But at night, many of those distractions, they disappear. Suddenly, there's just you and your thoughts. And when attention has fewer places to go, it often begins to turn inward. You begin to notice how you feel. You notice those thoughts in your mind. You begin to notice your body. You notice worries that were sitting quietly in the background all day. Now, this doesn't mean the anxiety has suddenly become more dangerous, because it hasn't. It often means you've simply become more aware of it. It's a bit like sitting in a quiet room and suddenly notice the ticking of a clock. The clock was ticking all day. You just couldn't hear it because of all the other things that were making the noise. And anxiety can work in a similar way. When your life becomes quieter, anxiety becomes easier to hear. Another reason nighttime anxiety can feel so intense is because we're often tired. And tired brains don't always think in the most balanced way, shall we say. Things that might seem manageable at 2 o'clock in the afternoon can feel overwhelming at 11 o'clock at night. When we're tired, we tend to find it harder to put things into perspective, to think rationally, harder to challenge worried thoughts, harder to remember previous successes, harder to see solutions. But it's almost as though anxiety gets a louder voice, while common sense, that rationality, gets a little quieter. And many people notice that the things they worried about intensely during the night often seem far less threatening the following morning because the situation hasn't changed, but their perspective has. I mean, that's often because they're rested, they're refreshed, and no longer viewing the problem through that lens of exhaustion, of tiredness. Another common trap is becoming anxious about sleep itself. Many people start the evening feeling relatively calm, and then a thought appears. What if I don't sleep tonight? At first, it seems like a reasonable question, but then another thought will probably follow it. If I don't sleep, tomorrow's going to be really bad. And then another, I won't be able to function properly. And another, what if this keeps happening? And before long, the person isn't trying to fall asleep anymore. They're trying to make sleep happen. And that creates pressure. Now, the problem with sleep is that it's one of the few things in life that doesn't respond well to effort. You can make yourself get out of bed, and you can make yourself clean the kitchen. You can make yourself go for a walk, but you can't force yourself to sleep. And the harder many people try, the more awake they become. And then, of course, they start checking the clock, checking how tired they feel, checking how many hours are left until morning, doing those mental calculations in bed. If I fall asleep now, I'll get 6 hours. If I fall asleep now, I'll get 5. If I fall asleep now, I'll get 4. And every check reminds the brain that something important is happening. It'll make the pathways, which makes relaxation even harder. Now, I've spoken to people who spend more energy trying to sleep than they spend working all day. They are constantly monitoring, constantly calculating those hours, constantly trying to control the uncontrollable. And that's exhausting. Another thing that often happens at night is that people start trying to solve problems they don't actually need solving at 2 a.m. And you might have experienced this. A thought appears, you begin to analyze it. And then another thought appears, and then another and another. And then before long, you've mentally traveled, 6 months into the future, trying to prepare for things that may never happen. Anxiety often presents itself as problem solving. It tells us we're being productive and responsible and prepared. But often we're simply worrying. And there's a big difference between problem solving and worrying. Problem solving usually leads somewhere, and worrying tends to go around in circles. The same questions, the same fears, the same possibilities, again and again. So what can we do? So one of the most helpful things is actually just recognizing what's happening. Rather than thinking, my anxiety is getting worse, try considering, my mind has fewer distractions right now. And rather than thinking there must be something wrong because I'm worrying, consider, I'm tired and my attention has turned inward. And rather than trying to fall asleep, just try allowing rest. Rest is valuable even when sleep doesn't arrive immediately. Lying quietly, breathing slowly, allowing the body just to settle. These things all have value. And one simple exercise I often suggest is this. When you notice yourself getting pulled into worry, you gently bring your attention back to the room around you. You notice the weight of your body on the mattress. You notice that feeling of the pillow beneath your head. Notice the temperature of the room. Notice any sounds around you, bringing you back into that present moment. Allow your attention to move away from future problems and back towards this present moment. You don't need to solve tomorrow, tonight. You don't need to answer every question before you sleep. And you don't need certainty before rest. Sometimes it's enough to simply remind yourself, this is just a thought. It's not an emergency. This is just anxiety, not danger. So before we finish today, I'd like you to take a slow breath in and then just let that go slowly. Allow your shoulders to simply relax. Allow your jaw to soften. Allow yourself to notice that right now, in this moment, you're safe. And perhaps remind yourself of this. Not every thought deserves your attention. Not every worry needs an answer right now. And not every night needs to be perfect. So thank you for listening to the Anxiety Reset podcast. If you'd like to send a question for any future episodes or some advice, you can email me at anxietyreset1@gmail.com. If you're enjoying the podcast, you can also find the Anxiety Reset podcast on YouTube, TikTok for some short anxiety tips and maybe some updates. If you'd like personal support with anxiety or panic attacks or overthinking, then you can find out more at www.favershamhypnotherapy.co.uk. And next time, we'll explore the anxiety adrenaline cycle and why anxiety can sometimes just seem to feed itself. So until next time, stay well.